You win some, you lose some. But we are in a winning phase. And so, what I want to first talk with you about is a huge victory in this country for all of us. And that relates to the more than 300,000 Haitian immigrants in the United States who are under what's called a TPS, temporary protected status. And what that has meant until Kristi Noem decided to threaten that is that people stay in this country, have jobs, participate in the communities, and not be subject to deportation orders. But you might remember the utter nonsense that was laughable if it weren't so evil when Donald Trump, in the lead up to the 2024 election, claimed that people from Haiti living in Springfield, Ohio, were eating the cats and eating the dogs. It was utter inanity. And yet he still has this on his mind, this racist deportation policy. And so I want to share first with you Tim Schneider, author of On Tyranny, professor from the United States who is now in Canada. I want to share with you how happy he is about this, because when Tim Schneider is happy about a legal development, I think that, adds some, joy, effervescence to it. So let's play that.
Good thing happened today. When today began, it looked like the federal government was going to carry out a lightning ethnic cleansing of Haitians from Springfield, Ohio, over the next few days. At the end of the day, we have a court ruling, a stay, which makes that impossible, at least for the time being. When good things happen, we got to recognize it. We got to take the win. We got to be glad that the suffering has been avoided. And we have to recognize that good things don't just happen. They're made to happen. People in Minneapolis had energy to notice Springfield, Ohio, which is wonderful. Reporters in Springfield and Dayton were covering the story. Local folks in Springfield were making preparations. Good people came together, and today something good happened as a result.
Okay. And so obviously the Haitian immigrants aren't only in Springfield, Ohio. Miami, Florida is one of the largest places for the Haitian diaspora, I believe, in the U.S. I want to share with you the conclusion of this judicial order, because it is something else. And to give you, put a little detail around this. This was federal court judge, so a U.S. District Court judge, that means trial court, named Anna Reyes, and she is of the District of Columbia. And she is the one who paused the order by Kristi Noem, which would have immediately would have ended, boom, on, I think it would have been Tuesday, today at midnight, so early this morning. It would have automatically terminated this protected status for all of the Haitians under that status in America. And we're talking over 300,000 people. And before I show you the final paragraph, what I first want to tell you guys is something Judge Reyes wrote in the decision. And this came out yesterday on Monday. So she said one thing she was particularly upset about is that the government didn't provide a reason why this temporary protected status should end, quote unquote, post haste. And she added that, yes, the Secretary of Homeland Security has some discretion, but the statute does not, as the judge said, grant Noem, quote, unbounded discretion to make whatever determination she wants in any way she wants, right? So let me read you from the decision. Again, Judge Reyes, quoting, Secretary Noem complains of strains unlawful immigrants place on our immigration enforcement system? Her answer: turn 352,959 lawful immigrants into unlawful immigrants overnight. And the judge adds, she complains of strains to our economy. Her answer: turn employed lawful immigrants who contribute billions in taxes into the legally unemployable. She complains of strains to our healthcare system. Her answer: turn the insured into the uninsured. This approach is many things. In the public interest is not one of them. Now, I mean, if you thought that was chef's kiss, right? It gets better. Let me read you the conclusion from this decision. And I think I will be able to, blow it up as big as I can, guys. Okay. Of course, this is 83 pages, so let's go right to the conclusion. You can, of course, read this, and let me do this. I'm going to drop this right now into the chat for your future reading pleasure, whether you just read the beginning, first few pages, or the whole thing. That is up to you. Okay, so here's the conclusion. I love this. There is an old adage among lawyers: if you have the facts on your side, and let me actually, since you have this now, I'm going to remove it. You have it if you want to read it. So let me go ahead. So there is an old adage among lawyers: if you have the facts on your side, pound the facts. If you have the law on your side, pound the law. If you have neither, pound the table. Secretary Noem, the record to date shows, does not have the facts on her side, or at least has ignored them. Does not have the law on her side, or at least has ignored it. Having neither and bringing the adage into the 21st century, she pounds X, formerly known as Twitter. I continue. Kristi Noem has a First Amendment right to call immigrants killers, leeches, entitlement junkies, and any other inapt name she wants. Secretary Noem, however, is constrained by both the Constitution and the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, to apply faithfully the facts to the law in implementing the TPS program. The record to date shows she has not yet to do that. Okay, that is a huge win for the rule of law, and we will have to see how we do. A second win in the immigration front that we learned of yesterday was that Congress is, thanks to a federal judge, no longer banned from getting access to ICE facilities. So this was a judge, Judge Cobb, barred the Department of Homeland Security from preventing members of Congress to visit these immigration detention facilities. So this is huge. And I think these are really important to acknowledge. Now, of course, we have some really scary things happening both on the legal, if we think of the, our law, money, and power, continuing on the, I would say, law and power front. We need to talk about the latest release, what the Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche is claiming is the final release of Epstein files. We need to talk about that. And there has been so much discussion already about what's in there, which aspects of what has been disclosed are credible, what's missing, and there's a lot missing. But I mean, by we, I mean, it's been all over the news. And I want to spend a show going through that. But we have a guest coming shortly at 9:15. And I'm sorry. Hi, Anna.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's not, I brought Anna up on stage. It is my fault by accident. She is an amazing, brilliant researcher. And my mind was saying, we have a guest who is about to come up on stage, and boom, I just brought her up. But one last thing I want to say before Anna, the lovely, brilliant Anna Gifty comes up is that it's atrocious what has happened with the Epstein files. I don't know if you've heard, but the victims are horrified. The number one job here for the government, in addition to releasing everything that was in the government's files related to the Epstein investigations, the Epstein child exploitation, child sex exploitation and trafficking ring, and the data about and information about his death or his suicide or murder, depending on how you look at it. They were supposed to protect the victims. And here is what we have found out. Let me just show you this quick clip.
Anguish for nearly 100 victims of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein after the Justice Department accidentally released their names and reportedly some of their images as well. Today, attorneys for victims demanding that all 3 million pages made public last week be taken down, telling a judge every hour matters. The harm is ongoing and irreversible. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche has acknowledged mistakes were made.
Every time we hear from a victim or their lawyer that they believe that their name was not properly redacted, we immediately rectify that.
But previously anonymous victims say that's not enough. I have never come forward, wrote one woman, identified as Jane Doe. This is devastating to my life. Please, I'm begging you to delete my name. Tonight, fellow survivors like Danny Binsky speaking out.
For survivors who have never, ever come forward, this is heartbreaking.
And the New York Times reporting that DOJ published dozens of nude images of young women or possibly teenagers before taking them down when they were alerted. The latest DOJ release, which officials say is the last one, included hundreds of mentions of President Trump, most of them in newspaper articles. Trump and Epstein were friends in the 1990s.
Okay, so it's horrifying, but not surprising. There are some people who think it was done deliberately. Yet, does it really matter? It would have been so easy, as one of the lawyers for several of the victims said, to type their names in the search box. And if they were there, take the files down. That is how the victims have found their names. But how are they supposed to find photos of themselves? There are millions of files. They're not easy to search. And now the government is putting it on the victims to say, bring them down. And so I have to really wonder how we can obviously trust them that they are going to do this right. And not only that, we are, of course, missing so much in here. We are missing so many of the FBI interviews with victims. We are also, I want to point out, which I heard one of the victims talk about yesterday, if the number one goal, which we don't believe it is, of Todd Blanche is as Deputy Attorney General and Pam Bondi as Attorney General is to protect the victims, then why is it the case that they have never once met with the victims? Victims' lawyers have reached out, tried to speak with Todd Blanche, and he has refused to meet with them. He's met with imprisoned, convicted child sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell and got her moved into a more swanky, lower security prison she shouldn't be entitled to. And apparently she has her own little doggy there. We know what the priorities are. Todd Blanche was and still is representing Donald Trump, not the people of the United States. Moreover, we have seen in these files more evidence about and allegations that Jeff Epstein had ties not just to the Mossad in Israel, but also to Vladimir Putin, that he, of course, had close ties to Peter Thiel. And so I'm thinking, why in the world, as we began the show, would anyone even want to remove the temporary protected status for a single person from Haiti? The over 350,000 people here, thank God, the federal judge said to Kristi Noem, not so fast. These folks are happy to be here. Not one single Haitian immigrant temporary protected status is in the Epstein files. Not a single one. Not a single one has been accused of being part of a child sex trafficking network or bribery scheme, taking cash in Cava bags. I mean, think about this. The people who we should be deporting are people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, both of whom are in the files. And, what are they even doing here? Okay. So with that, I want to introduce our guest who has been waiting patiently. And you may have already heard of her, Anna Gifty Apoku Ajaman, and she has an amazing new book. She has been making the rounds, and I cannot believe she is taking the time to speak with us. Her new book that came out this fall is The Double Tax: How Women of Color Are Overcharged and Underpaid. This book has an introduction by none other than Chelsea Clinton. And I'm just going to delay absolutely no further and bring Anna up on stage when she's not going to be shocked that I brought her up without any kind of introduction. But, we do this show on the fly. It's live. I am my own production studio, so I can't blame anyone but myself. Okay. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Hello, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, you are looking fabulous.
Oh,
absolutely
thank
fabulous
you.
today. So, hey, I first want to start and say, how has the book tour been going? I mean, you have been on, national morning talk shows, cool podcasts. Have you gotten a break? What has it been like for you for your first book?
Well, yeah, I have not gotten a break, which is something that I need to work on. I think folks oftentimes forget that I'm actually like a full-time PhD student. So the books and stuff are what people think are my full-time gig, but like I am actually still in school trying to graduate. But no, it's been really great. I think that the most recent thing that came out for some of those who might be watching was sort of the segment on CBS, funnily enough, about Black women's unemployment. So I can assure you that's a well-researched segment because I contributed to the research. So don't doubt any of the numbers that are cited there. Like they're pulling it directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But yeah, it's been like kind of a whirlwind. I think what's been shocking is, as you know, like I think books that come out, like not all of them become bestsellers, but it's interesting to see like what books stir up conversation. And I guess I'm kind of shocked that my book is still stirring up conversation like nearly 6 months later. So I'm very grateful for folks like yourself and other people who have covered the book and are just really interested in having a conversation about the current moment and how the book relates to it.
My only complaint is that you didn't write it a few years ago when I was teaching a course called, in my old law school, I'm now at Wayne State in Detroit, but when I was teaching in Massachusetts, I taught a course called Money, Law, and Power. And one of the books I taught was Dorothy Brown's The Whiteness of Wealth, which tackles a similar topic differently from the way you are. And it would have been fun to assign it now. So I'm going to have to start teaching that course. For those of our readers, who have not yet read the book, and you should, can you kind of tell us what, both what sort of motivated and what your findings are. What motivated you and what your findings are.
Yeah, so I think that what motivated the book was mainly just kind of being sick of the gaslighting, if I'm being quite honest. So, you'll see like a headline that will kind of undercut a Black woman's experience or a marginalized woman's experience, or there would be like attempts to dismiss our experiences as those are sort of like corner cases. They don't really apply to the rest of the population. And I think as someone who has spent quite a bit of time just like looking at the research, trying to understand how these things are connected, I was like, I think that we're losing out on a potential future that leaves nobody behind by not having an explicit conversation about how Black women in particular are sort of the canaries in the coal mine in every single stage of someone's life, right? Especially a woman's life. And I think it was important to frame it as the double tax because I think a lot of the research and a lot of the discourse has happened around women.
Right.
And that's really coded for white women, right? And so I was like, I need to kind of start there to kind of bring in why this dimension of intersectionality with race and class is actually really, really important for even that discussion to happen, right? And so I would say to folks who are interested in this book that this book essentially says you cannot get rid of gender inequality without addressing racial inequality and class inequality in full. So if you want the first thing to go away, you actually have to make sure that the second and the third thing also go away as well. And so some of the findings, like I guess I can kind of talk a little bit about how this book is framed. So the book is framed kind of like the lifetime of a woman's, cycle, basically. So there's certain key moments that women deal with, or they may or may not deal with. Things like, discovering beauty standards for the first time and contending with that. Things like, negotiating your first paycheck, deciding to maybe become a mother or a caregiver, and then of course, retirement. And so in a lot of these different chapters, what I do is I bring in stories of women from across the country. And I also go ahead and bring in the data and the evidence that we know about the topic. And so what seems to have resonated with folks from the tour is definitely beauty, right? So we're getting ready to talk a little bit about like Black History Month and, Black folks' contributions to that. And I think beauty is something that, especially in light of like Love Island, it's become front and center when it comes to thinking about the intersections of race, gender, and class. And so in that chapter, we talk about kind of how expensive it is to just like look beautiful and how it's actually like in a woman's best interest to strive for that because there's real payoffs of appearing attractive.
Financial, social, credibility, all it's a presentation that it's not ephemeral, right? It's tangible financially. We all know, right? Some people think it's just optional and it's like, okay, cool.
There's a cost of presentability that all women have to incur. And what I argue in that chapter is that that cost is more steep for Black women and women of color. So when you think about where that might show up in our hair, where it takes us longer to get our hair done, it's more expensive, and then we get further penalized more from a very young age if our hair doesn't look the right way, right? And so in that chapter, I talk about how the Crown Act is actually a really important thing to pass. So the Crown Act essentially bars hair discrimination at the state level right now, but like we're hoping to get it to the federal level. Well, we'll see. Maybe in a couple of years, but like for now, like that was the goal. And what I'll say is that hair discrimination is really a proxy for racial discrimination, right? So like I can say, I don't really like the way her hair looks, or her hair is unprofessional. And so I don't want people with her hairstyle working at my workplace. But then there's only like one race that applies to. So then that's where the racial discrimination proxy comes into play. So that's an example of one of the things I talk about in the book.
No, I mean, I have to tell you, first of all, I love your hair.
Oh,
and I know you've talked about those traces. And I want to say, and that's a weird thing for me as a white woman to say, I'm not going to ask if I can touch it. I promise you, I'm not going to be one of those people, but I want to acknowledge it because you brought up the topic. But I had a colleague at Western New England Law School who wrote a lot about the Crown Act. And that was her paper that we recruited her. Now I'm, as I said, at Wayne State. But when I, about, I don't know, you might be too young to remember this, but there used to be a show on NPR called Car Talk. Do you know about this show? Okay, so these two guys, Click and Clack. Are you remembering? They were these old guys.
The name sounds familiar, but it might be before my time.
Okay, so what happened is there are these two guys with like two white guys with heavy New England or Boston accents. And they'd have people call on the show and say, I've got this problem with my car. Can you help diagnose it? Right.
Okay.
And the reality is that they would source these. People would call in and they say, okay, your appointment is 2 weeks from now on the show. So they could do some research, right? And it was always just so funny because there was, I'm not a car repair person at all, but I loved the show because there was something weird about someone's carburetor or like this weird windshield, but I loved it. So I thought, like, why the hell don't we have a show called Hair Talk?
Oh.
Like, I was like, you could do, Hair Talk is everything and every kind of hair, wherever it is on your body or whatever. Like there is so much politics and, gender, intersectionality, race, class, whatever. And, when you think about, and this whole, proximity to whiteness stuff. And for you haven't met me before, but my hair has gone through many transformations. And right now it's like blonde and straight. And like, what is that about? It's, I have sort of darker hair and it kept getting, when I was younger, I used to do this to it and it kept getting darker. And so I'm like, okay, I let it go natural. I loved it darker, but then I went gray. And then my mother was very sick and she didn't like it. And I finally gave in and she ended up passing away, but she was sick with cancer. And I said to my mom, if it makes you happy, I'll do it. And then I'm like, I kind of like it. And then it feels a little weird because then I think, well, this is what you talk about. What is my presentation? Am I sort of blending in and you look at me and you think, oh, she must be this white Republican lady. And then what comes out of my mouth is not that. And so I don't know. It's complicated. So I even have anxiety about my viewers are probably, what is she talking about? This crazy law professor. But I have anxiety about the way in which invisibility and conformity and what I'm saying about fitting into certain patriarchal and white norms and all this stuff, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
But when you say, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, you talk.
Go ahead.
Do you have a response? You must have some kind of response.
I think that you're right in the sense that being blonde is like a signifier in this country and also in the West. And it's interesting that I think I learned as I was doing research for this book that a lot of folks are not natural blondes. It's something that
almost nobody, right?
Almost nobody. And so I think there's almost a allure with you're kind of tapping into this thing that's sort of seen as purely white. I don't know, right? Which is funny though, because there's Black people.
Because Beyonce can do it too.
Right. And I think when she did come out with the blonde hair, it was political. People
at first, right.
Why are you rocking blonde?
Why are you standing in that space? You're not allowed to be in that room or whatever.
That's right. And Dr.
Or the other, why are you trying to?
Yes. And I think that was very much where the tension was. I think that it's interesting that you talk about white women and hair politics. I think there is some politics when it comes to white women's hair. And I think it oftentimes has to do with the color of your hair. And whether or not it's a natural blonde, whether or not you're a brunette, there's this weird, obviously, dynamic with gingers, right? I love red hair. I think it's beautiful, but it's interesting to see that. I think some folks see it as the furthest away from blonde, right? So then those individuals are treated differently than maybe their blonde or brunette peers.
Right.
It's interesting to see how that kind of pops up even amongst white folks.
Well, I should add a layer because we're going to do a hair talk. I want to talk about your book, but I'm sure. White and Jewish, right? I'm white and Jewish. And so a lot of my family has dark curly hair. My hair is more, if it's natural, looks like Janis Joplin. I cannot, if I tried to have, and my husband's probably listening, he's like, I like your hair natural. He would rather if my hair were, but it's, part of it is I don't know. Anyway, you're not my therapist here. But so that's also, you talk about color, but if you're Jewish, it's also straightening your hair, right? And it comes back to this, some of the similar things. Okay. So the words double tax. It's a great title.
Thank you.
Is it double, triple, quadruple? What is your definition? What do you mean specifically by what is the first tax that maybe you think everybody gets, and what's the second one that particularly women of color have to pay?
Yeah, so I think the way to define the double tax is it's the compounded cost of racism and sexism. So I think sexism is really what most people understand. Like, women are being treated differently because they're women. And then racism, obviously, I think people also understand, but this is sort of the, I would say, quantification of misogynoir. So
exactly, that's a perfect word. I love that.
Yeah, how close are you to the discrimination that Black women face daily, right? And so you can imagine, for example, like a dark-skinned Southeast Asian woman is going to experience some form of colorism, which kind of puts her closer to the camp of like a dark-skinned Black woman, right? Rather than her white counterparts or her lighter counterparts. But in something like beauty, her hair is still maybe fitting the standards set by Eurocentric standards, right? She has finer hair, it's longer, that sort of thing. Though if you actually have conversations with Southeast Asian women or with Asian women, even from East Asia, they'd say like, that's actually not true. Like, they still get kind of policed a little bit about how they're presenting and how their hair shows up. I think there's been like TikToks about, you know, folks who used to get made fun of because their hair was too long, or people said it was dirty or oily or something. But I think like the point here is Black women are incurring a very, very steep cost as compared to everybody else. And like, you know, if we don't, for example, straighten our hair, there's like a penalty to that. Like, we could not get a job, we could get suspended. Like, so there's like,
and that becomes a signifier that you are refusing to conform, and not just conform to it's not the beauty ideal, but you're refusing to conform to a particular kind of white patriarchy, right? Because it's the othering. Like, if you're being othered across, you know, race and I'm not lecturing to you, I'm just sort of saying this out to the audience. But like, if you're being othered, what is the so-called norm? And the only reason why this is this double tax is because it's this checklist of who's the norm and who do we see still as the people who walk into a room and are entitled to be listened to, respected, hired. And of course, you could choose, you know, if you're saying, well, it's not every white male. Class comes into this, obviously, looks, height. I mean, there's all these things. Like, if you're a certain height, white male with a certain amount of class status, that is the norm. And so against that, like, what are you, like you're saying, every step away you are from that becomes a tax.
That's right. And I would say that the beauty norms are set by the white patriarchy. So if you really think about like who leads the fashion houses, stuff like that, it's actually not women. And it's not white women, it's not Black women. So it's like these white men are also kind of dictating who's deemed as beautiful, who's not. I mean, if you just think about like kind of the Miss USA pageants, if you think about the Miss World pageants,
do I have to?
Right? Like, my point is just like, who's like in charge of those things? A lot of men. And so I do find it kind of fascinating that like the patriarchy, men are in women's business a lot. And it's very much about like defining how we lead and live our lives. And I guess what I'm saying in the book is like, that comes at a price, and that price is a lot higher for Black women who are furthest away from what these men deem as beautiful. Yeah.
And let me, I want to inject one thing we haven't talked about, which is gender. And women, whether they are lesbian or bisexual or just present, well, obviously there's a whole range of gender presentation within the gay community, but let's say, for example, you know, women who present more in a butch or male style, how they get treated in the workplace, sometimes better. I mean, that's another thing, or at least white women. I mean, I don't know. So I think it's, how do you deal in your book or in your thinking? Let me say, I'm going to back up and say this differently. It's more of a statement than a question. Like, my observation would be, even if you're choosing to live your life not dependent upon men, not literally in your own home, being a servant to, a supporter of, whether that means sexually or housemaid or whatever person of men, it's still in the culture, right? And so, you know, I guess I'm just trying to think about how you extract, because we're talking, you and I are sort of nodding together saying, yeah, you have to work on this. It costs something. There are some people watching the show going, I don't do that. And it's probably the people nodding are going to be more usually white women who say, well, I don't do that. But how do you deal with that piece of the intersectionality, gender?
Yeah, I think this is something that unfortunately the data is binary a lot of time.
I
Like
see.
the data you cite. So they're looking at like male, female sex. And so
Right.
it's hard to tease out how like being a trans woman compounds with being Black. And so that's why
Right.
at the very end of the book, I suggest a bunch of other titles. I'm like, look, I didn't have the range with the data and the stories that
Right.
were shared to really explore this. So I recommend folks like Raquel Willis, for example, like that I think do a good job of really digging into how those different themes that the double tax illustrates shows up in someone's life and how they kind of navigate it. But I think to your point about people opting into womanhood, right? For example,
That's a nice way of saying it. Opting into womanhood, whether they're trans
these are
or
the costs that they're going to
Right.
have to consider, right? There's like these, and so it's interesting because you could argue like if someone opts out of it, like do they deal with these costs? And I would argue that yeah, they still do though, right? So if they're women and they opt out of it, like a good portion of their life at least is informed by how like being a woman shaped their life, and perhaps that's what steered them away from even opting into it in the first place. So I think that like
Right.
you know it's nuance is what I will say, but and I also think that again race plays quite a bit of a role here, where I do think that like members of the LGBTQ plus community, if they're white, are more well received by predominantly white spaces than they are if they are Black. So like, and this is something that, you know, I think within that community, people have had a lot of very frank conversations about. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but like, I think it's important to note that, you know, like race plays a huge role here in a way that like people don't really want to admit, but it's very much woven into the fabric of how our society functions, and it informs essentially the caste system, even within marginalized groups.
Right. And when you say caste system, of course, I'm thinking a little bit about the book Caste, because I think that her Wilkerson's book, I think it helps people who have a hard time for whatever reason thinking about race, and also maybe just thinking in binary ways of thinking about ranking and how it works. And I think that for folks who haven't read Isabel Wilkerson's book, I mean, it's really phenomenal. I have The Warmth of Several Suns. Is that the name of her book?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have it and I haven't read it. And it's like, I don't know if you feel this way. I know you're in grad school trying to finish your PhD, but you keep thinking there's going to be a moment when you can at least read like 10% of your books. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
So I want to switch a little. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. More to what you're doing. So what you're doing with your career, which is you have now published a book before you have written or completed your dissertation. No, or is it, so that's
actually
interesting.
my second book. So I have a book that came out, I think 3 years ago now. So it's called The Black Agenda. And that book was an edited volume where I invited like Black experts to weigh in on things like climate, tech, education, etc. So this is the first book, the double tax, that I've written. But right now, I guess I'm leaving grad school with 2 books under my belt. Yeah.
Which is good. And I guess I've got 2 things I want to make sure we get to. One is I want to talk about the Sadie Collective. Which
yes.
The grad school piece is, and also the book. So like you, I write books that I hope are accessible to the public, but if you look in the back, I have like 30 pages of endnotes, highly researches and so on, right? And like you were saying, well, I can't really speak to that entirely because the data aren't there. Can you tell me a little bit about your method? Obviously, there's the interviewing people, but the data, where you get them. I mean, you've talked about the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which now we're wondering, but historically was relatively accurate.
I think it's still accurate. Yeah, I think they haven't gutted it completely yet. I do know like the administration actually doesn't like the BLS because they're telling the truth. So, but like we'll like know, like economists will ring the alarm once if anything happens with them. But what else?
And let me just say something for people who don't know. It's BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and a lot of their data come from places like ADP. So you can't really fake it entirely, right? I mean, some of the inputs Is that why you
And
think,
I would
how
say,
do the
like, they do, like,
economists, how would you
surveys and
know if it's super off? I mean, what do you think the economists would think?
I mean, I think that like there's people who track like job numbers and stuff, and there's numbers that come out throughout the month. And so I think the economists who pay very close attention to that, folks like Eric Sojourner or Benga Ajolore, like they would be able to tell if like the reporting was off, because like how did they have such a drastic increase or a drastic decrease? So there's checks and balances within the Bureau, but then there's also people who are checking and balancing it outside of it because they need that analysis for their own work. So I'm not too worried about
it. Also, because it'd be hard to rig it because it gets granular, it gets by state, by whatever. They would have to be very perfect and it would look like Trump's tax returns. I mean, people would recognize it was fake. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your process, your data process.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was something that it took a really long time. I mean, writing books that are well researched and well thought out, it takes time. So this book was actually supposed to come out the year of the election, but we pushed it a year because we just needed more time with the data. So, you know, I worked with some wonderful research assistants, shout out to Adeline and Yvonne, who, you know, helped me assemble a bunch of papers. A lot of them were peer reviewed. We did articles as well. Again, these articles have to be well researched. So we're looking at their links and we cross-checked, I gotta say, like 7 times. Like because we want to make sure that
right. Because it's not always right. Some secondary source misquotes or misstates. So you did that, right? You layered it in. Amazing.
Exactly. And so making sure that like what we're citing numbers wise, especially, is not coming out of nowhere, and that you as a reader, you can go back and find that report. A lot of these reports, they were hosted on like a government website, they've been removed. So we've posted the like, what is it, like archive, like it's the Internet Archive link, so that even if it's been removed, you can go find it. But I think that was kind of the process where it's like making sure that we are citing and triple citing what needs to be included to further bolster the argument, but also to provide really like evidence for what we were hearing in the field. And in the field, which is where we were talking about you know, the different issues that people faced in their own lives, that I also relied on a team of researchers. So I'm not a qualitative researcher. That means I don't really handle interviews day to day. I'm not someone who analyzes that kind of data. And so I relied on
quantitative. You're quantitative because your background's math and something in economics.
And economics and policy. Right. And so brought in, you know, my 2 qualitative researchers, Kay, and why am I forgetting her name? Oh my gosh. There's another person. I don't know why I forgot her name.
Don't worry. Maybe she doesn't watch the show. I mean, there's only, I think we have like almost 12,000 followers and maybe a couple thousand will watch today. So they may not be, it's not bad. Not that I'm boasting. I'm trying to build the audience.
I don't know why I'm forgetting her name, but she's amazing. Right. Anyway, so I brought in these 2 qualitative researchers, and essentially the way we did it was we only focused on Black and white women, namely because they are at the extremes when we look at the data. And we also had limited resources and a limited budget. And so we had our white qualitative researcher interview the white women, and we had our Black qualitative researcher interview the Black women. And that was actually really important because, you know, I worked with Dr. Lauren Mims, who is a professor out of NYU. And she said, it's actually really important that you match race here because you don't want people to police the way that they're telling their experiences, depending on who they're telling their experiences to. And so we got some really rich like data. And so now I'm like trying to figure out, like, well, we have all this qualitative data. Someone needs to analyze it, publish it, that sort of thing. And so that's like kind of the next step to kind of keep the work going. But like, that's sort of how the process came together. And it's kind of crazy because a lot of people were asking me like, is this part of your dissertation? And I was like, no, like
I knew it wasn't. This isn't how it, yeah. And by the way, for people who don't know, you're at the Kennedy School at Harvard. Is that right?
Yes, I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School. Yeah.
We've heard of it. It's okay. It's okay. So I'm just going to say, I've got a JD from Harvard. So I'm not entirely intimidated by you. Like yes, you are 30 years younger than me and you are hot shit and so flipping brilliant. But you know, not at all intimidated. No, I mean, good. No, you're just fabulous. I'm going to ask you about the SETI project in a second, but so this is kind of incredible. Are you done with all your classes right now? You just have to, you're just
done. I don't know if people know how PhDs work, but basically it's like broken up into, I would say three parts. So your first part is you get accepted, whatever, you start classes for a lot of social science PhDs. So that's like psychology, sociology, economics. You have 2 years of classes, maybe 3 if you are interested in learning more. And then you have like 3 to N years. When I say N, it's like, we don't know.
Or ABD, you might never do it.
ABD.
You will, but
just figuring out sort of like how you want to use the things that you learned in the first 2 years in projects that you're interested in pursuing in the latter part of your PhD. And then you graduate, go on the market, that sort of thing. So I'm in sort of the ABD period where I would say my research really digs into the implications or the societal implications of Black leaders across different aspects of our society. So thinking things about academia, in corporate America, and as well as in like entrepreneurship. And so that's sort of what I actually focus on in my day job. But like sort of the side, I think about the broader implications of race, gender, and the economy. And so that's kind of where my op-eds come into play, the books that I put out come into play, even some of the commentary I do online, like on Instagram, comes into play. So like those are, I would say, like the two realms that I kind of operate in. And they feel complementary. So a lot of people always ask, like, how am I able to do both? And I always say, like, it's just an extension of the other. And so it doesn't feel like I'm building something that's like very strenuous, but rather like these things are kind of interconnected. And so it kind of bolsters each other. Mm-hmm.
You know, what blows my mind is that, well, and the positive side, that we're having this conversation, even with the backdrop of maybe we don't even have real elections, in the backdrop of they're trying to, you know, control what we read and demonize things like critical race theory and intersectionality, right? And then on the positive, and then also sort of a bummer is like, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when Kimberly Crenshaw was first coming up with intersectionality. I was in law school when Pat Williams, you know, wrote The Alchemy of Race and Rights, and Derek Bell was still alive. I mean, these are my people, right? And then I have to see you here, and I know you have your own legacy in economics, but for me, coming through this lens of law, I'm like, it's great that you're doing this, but as someone in the comments said, we still have to do this. And so I guess I'm hopeful that I'm happy that you and I aren't just like ditching it and saying like, nothing matters. We're never going to get to the part where we can move forward instead of backwards. So I want to ask you about that before, and then maybe this leads into the Sadie project. How do you keep up your energy all the while knowing we're in an extremely precarious situation in this country? You know, do we even need to mention who lost the last election and who won? I mean, that's a text in and of itself. Anyway, so what gives you hope and makes you not quit and thinks that what you're doing can still matter?
I mean, I think for me, it's just like everything I'm doing is for the next generation. And I really think you have to have that in mind to keep going, right? So like, you know, a lot of people, we just had MLK Day pass. And I think people don't realize that like Martin Luther King Jr. didn't really see his dream fully realized before he was assassinated, right? But that didn't stop his family, especially his daughter.
He said it. He's coming to the mountaintop, but he wasn't gonna.
And I think that's a little bit biblical.
I know, but
of like,
I know,
you know that the promised land is out there, but you're not going to step foot in it. And I think understanding that, you know,
well, you're making me cry. Actually,
no,
well, because this is what I think. Like, this is where I am. Like, I don't want. I don't want chattel slavery again in this country. I don't want feudalism. Like, that is the big picture, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to get on the same page about what the administration and folks who are aligned with it are committed to. I want to kind of make something clear to the listeners, because I don't know how far this is going to go. So people are wondering, like, why is this happening? And I think that you have to take it back to 2016, 2017. You might be wondering, what am I talking about? Am I talking about Trump's election? No, I'm actually not. I'm talking about there was a Brookings report that was released around that time. I might be off by my dates by like a year or two. And basically what the Brookings report said, and Brookings, by the way, is a think tank. For those who don't know, it like produce it. It basically translates academic insights for policymakers, and they also do their own work. And what they found was, according to the census, I think it's like 2040 or 2050, this country is going to be majority Black and brown.
Right.
And if you want to understand where every crash out in the West
Perfect.
is coming from, it's really
Right.
the fact that
It's multiracial
world-
democracy, right? We want it, they don't. Sorry.
Exactly. Our world is actually majority Black and brown, but the West is not. It's inevitably going to become that. And I think what you're seeing is people who have abused the marginalized for generations, realizing, oh my God, if the tables turn, we are going to be subject to the same type of abuse. And we're not saying that that's actually going to happen, but that's the perception that is essentially driving the resurgence of eugenics, driving the deportations that are illegal and the kidnappings, driving the killings of many, by the way, individuals who are victims of ICE. And so all of these things are just coming up under Black and brown people are about to take over, and I'm scared about this. And you could argue even the fact that the majority of white folks voted a second time to bring in Trump is very much driven by this.
Absolutely.
But let's not say that, like, what gives me hope is that.
Thank you. Right.
Oh, yeah. What gives me hope is that this is not sustainable. So maybe I won't see the promised land, but I'll be part of the generation that ensured that this wasn't sustainable and that helps us think about ways to rebuild. And like, that's for me how I've kind of thought about it. So in my work, it's very future oriented. The Black agenda is very much about solutions that sort of use Black people's experiences as a praxis for how we should liberate everybody else. Whereas like the double tax thinks about that more specifically through the lens of Black women. And I think that my own research is very much about what happens if you actually do give Black leaders who care about Black people an opportunity to lead. What are the implications of that? And so all of this is to say that, like, I'm thinking through the lens, excuse me, I'm thinking through the lens of making sure that my nieces who are under the age of 5 live in a better world than I do. And I believe that that world very much is going to be a function of people who look like them being at the helm, caring about their well-being, and also ensuring that freedom and possibility and opportunity is available for all. And that means that the old guard that's in the way has to get out of the way. And so if that
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Let them implode, but, you know, protect your own, protect your community, build up, you know, almost like systems to ensure that whatever the blowback is, you don't get completely taken out. You have to be grounded and rooted in something. And so for me, that's the focus of this year, where I'm being grounded and rooted as the work is starting to flourish. And though that's sort of what keeps me going.
I love that. I just want to like make that a clip and put it out there into the world, because you just very clearly encapsulated how the direct line we can see from 2016 to Stephen Miller, literally, I don't know if you've seen his latest thing, saying things like, well, other countries in the West import third world people to be subordinate. I mean, you're seeing them, you know, when I began the show talking about the 350,000 people from Haiti who have temporary protected status, we know why they want them to go. Also, just for people who don't, you know, for me, this is all, you know, the liberation of all, you know, what is MLK's thing about the fabric that we're interwoven. There's a way of saying this, and I can't remember, but this idea that everyone's liberation is my liberation. Your niece and nephew are my niece and nephew. Like, this is my, you know, this is together. But for people who only see themselves in the category of whiteness, part of this project is, this is why abortion is, this is why they want white women to have a ton of babies, right? This is why they're going to,
they want white women to have a ton of white babies.
Oh, yes. White women to have white babies. Back to miscegenation. Like, they want the white babies, which means they want women to be financially dependent, white women to be financially dependent on white men. Now, this all exists in a system of oppression. And I don't want to be in a system of oppression. And it's so crazy, you know, but these people still holding on to power want that. They want hierarchy, they want domination. And there's something, this line, and then you've got to talk to me about the Sadie Project and we'll go because I don't want to keep you too long. But there's something, I think it was either Jane Fonda or who is that woman who, I'm forgetting her name now, talk about names, who founded like Ms. and I'm Gloria Steinem, you know, second wave of white women's feminism. But anyway, she said something like, we're not ranked, we're linked. And when I think about that, and you're talking about, you know, how do you protect your own, how do you create mutual aid and community while this whole shit falls down, you know, that's one thing. The other thing is, how do we get more Zoran Mandamis? You know, how do we get people who are listening, who are not just part of the existing political parties and trying to rise up through those ranks, but actually have their ear to the ground and want to create that multiracial democracy. You know, my friend, I don't know, one time I got to talk to you offline, but the work you're doing is so connected to some of my law professor friends. I don't know if you know Spencer Overton at George Washington. You probably don't know some of these older folks who are now like, you know, full professors, but what you're doing would be, your economics research would be very helpful for some of these folks. So do you mind if we like have a real chat? Like,
for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
So,
I mean, to your point, I think, I mean, I'll kind of go down the line. I think what's happening with white women in abortion is just, they want more white babies. And they think that that's going to be enough to counteract what I would say is the inevitability, which is that right now, you know, 1 in 4 Gen Z is Hispanic, Latino, and basically Gen Alpha is not a majority minority. And so there's like, what they're trying to do is like reverse the demographic shift. And it's just,
this is a good thing. Like when you say that, I'm like, psych. Like I think about American culture. I think like, isn't this what we want? I mean, I live now literally in downtown Detroit or Midtown. I'm in a Black majority city by choice because I'm looking at around me and I'm like, you know, these white people are out there wilding with like this crazy shit. Like I want to live in a place I feel safe. Like honest to God, it's like,
and I think that's
what's wrong with them. I'm scared of like these people who want ICE to be pulling people out of their houses and stuff like that. Although Minnesota, I mean, that's a kind of but go ahead. Sorry.
No,
now tell me about Sadie. Tell me about the Sadie Project, because I want people to know about that. And then I will let you go because I could talk to you forever.
Sure. So I think the Sadie Collective is sort of an extension of what I was talking about, where, you know, I co-founded that organization when I was in college. And I think this kind of goes back to what I was going to say, which is, I think a lot of people are looking for a savior to come and get them out of this situation. And I think that you are your own savior in some sense, right? Like you linking up with other people in your community, that's what will save you. And I think that, relying on your elected leaders to show up in an environment where they're disincentivized to show up is like a fool's errand, right? At this point, I think what we're learning from the past is that when these leaders fail to step up, your community has to step up. And so I think that with the Sadie Collective, that was very much it, where, you know, we saw a lack of support for, you know, Black women at the time who were interested in pursuing economics, finance, policy, and data science. And we said, you know what, we'll just start it. We don't know what we're doing, but maybe people will be interested enough. And we were able to raise like almost $20,000 just off of tweets.
Amazing.
Like, asking people, hey, can you donate towards this? And I think that people forget that if folks are convicted enough by your mission, they will support it. And I think that extends to your own personal life. You can do things like, you know, if you're somebody who's really concerned about folks not being able to read, why don't you just start like a weekend thing where like a readathon or something, like y'all are reading as a community. You're maybe teaching people how to read. You're helping people with their literary skills. Like it doesn't have to be super fancy. It doesn't have to be super polished. Like a lot of times you just need to start. And I think a lot of times people are really afraid to just start. And that actually is kind of what they don't want. If I'm really being honest, they don't want people to fight back, and they don't want people to start sort of initiatives that bring folks together. And I think like Minnesota has really given us sort of a masterclass in community organizing, where it's like everybody's just locked in, right? And I think that's exactly what needs to happen nationwide. This cannot be about you and yours. Like it's just actually like, if it's about, I'll say it like this, If you approach the current moment as through individualism, you will be left behind. The only people who are surviving this moment are community minded. And so like, unless you are trying to plug into a community, unless you're trying to uplift and support and be part of a community, you will not survive whatever is.
And isn't that the message of life? I mean, you can't take it with you, in your final days. What do you have but the legacy through your children, maybe the people you taught, your community? What are you waiting for? But just dive right in. This has been amazing. I've got other stuff to talk to you like in the nitty gritty, but so great. Thank you so much for your time, Anna. And we're gonna, probably don't know, but in the chat, the mods have been putting up links to both of your books.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So thanks so much. And I'm gonna kick you off stage now so I can say goodbye to folks. But I'll be in touch.
Thanks. You.
So, okay. She is amazing. As we say, the kids are all right, utterly brilliant. And so now I owe you a crazy town. I absolutely owe you a crazy town. And this crazy town comes from Jeanine Pirro. So here we go, guys. Let me just play the music real quick. Okay. So let me just play this. It's amazing how the Second Amendment purists somehow forget that they have been fighting against even sensible gun laws. Jeanine Pirro, let's listen to what she has to say, and I'll talk to you on the other side. And, listen, I am for sensible gun laws. I'm even for the kinds of things that DC wanted to do. There's a famous Supreme Court case called Heller that tried to stop people from having, I think, handguns in DC. I'm not a Second Amendment expert, but let's play her.
You bring a gun into the district, you marked my words, you're going to jail. I don't care if you have a license in another district, and I don't care if you're a law-abiding gun owner somewhere else. You bring a gun into this district, count on going to jail, and hope you get the gun back. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's amazing how accountability works, when people think that
okay, this is nuts. Like, again, I'm fine with DC deciding what its laws are, but we literally just have a federal prosecutor ignoring the fact that in 2008, the United States Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision called District of Columbia versus Heller, held that all law-abiding, responsible Americans have the right to possess guns in their homes, right? So this is crazy. I don't know what she means by, if you bring it into DC, like you come into DC and you have an apartment, you're allowed to have a gun under the law. Again, not a Second Amendment expert, but it's crazy town that somehow the Republicans, people who only vote Republican, they claim, because they don't want people taking away their gods and their guns. And who's trying to take away people's gods and guns? It is the Republicans. Okay, guys, thanks so much. And I will see you tomorrow morning.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Gen Taub Show, where welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Gen Taub Show.